In April 2025, a seemingly technical notice from China's Ministry of Commerce sent shockwaves through the world. Beijing announced new restrictions on the export of rare earth elements, a group of 17 metals buried deep within the earth, yet positioned at the very heart of every modern technological chain. Immediately after the announcement, prices for many rare earths, including neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium, skyrocketed, some rising by more than 40% within just 2 weeks. Semiconductor manufacturers in Japan and South Korea, defense corporations across Europe, even Boeing and Lockheed Martin in the United States convened emergency meetings to assess the risk of disruption. They all knew once China tightened supply, the entire global value chain, from smartphones to fighter jets, could grind to a halt within months. From electric vehicle batteries and wind turbines to smartphones, radars, lasers, and precision-guided weapons, everything depends on these seemingly anonymous minerals. In a world racing toward digitalization and militarization, rare earths have become the lifeblood of the global technological economy, and China for years has been the heart that pumps it. According to data from the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, by the end of 2024, China accounted for more than 90% of global mining output and nearly 69% of refining capacity. Those numbers speak to more than production. They symbolize power, the power to control supply chains on a scale no other nation can match. But Beijing did not stop there. 6 months later, in October 2025, the Chinese government added 5 more elements to its export restriction list. Holmium, erbium, thulium, europium, and ytterbium materials crucial for defense technologies, optical sensors, and advanced semiconductor manufacturing. An analyst from Bloomberg Economics compared the move to a double strike, one that hits both supply chains and market confidence. It forced global investors to ask themselves, is globalization still safe when one nation can shut off the world's resource valve with a political decision? Behind the decision lay more than economics. As U.S.-China trade tensions escalated, in Washington continued blocking Beijing's access to advanced semiconductor technology. This time, China struck back not with chips, but with the materials that make chips possible. In this game, China is not merely exporting rare earths, it is exporting dependence. And that dependence makes the rest of the world, especially the United States, uneasy. With that single move, Beijing reminded the West of a truth it had long forgotten. In the 21st century, resources are not only found in the ground, they rest in the hands of those who know how to wield them as instruments of power. Washington's reaction came almost immediately. This time, the United States wasn't imposing tariffs merely to balance trade. The goal was punishment and deterrence, transforming tariffs into a true instrument of strategy. Within weeks of China's announcement, President Donald Trump's administration unveiled a new tariff package on Chinese goods, with rates as high as 100% on critical sectors ranging. What captured global attention even more was the extraordinary call coming from Washington to Brussels. The U.S. urged the European Union to impose a 500% punitive tariff on Chinese products. The number was not just staggering, it symbolized a grand strategy forcing Europe to choose sides. According to Reuters, the proposal quickly gained momentum in the U.S. Senate. 85 senators jointly signed a resolution granting President Trump authority to implement special tariffs on China. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent declared bluntly, China is buying 60% of Russia's oil and 90% of Iran's. Every barrel of that oil is a financial bullet keeping those regimes alive. When Washington taxes Chinese goods, it isn't just defending domestic industry. It's cutting off the cash flows sustaining Moscow and Tehran's strategic adversaries of the West. Yet America cannot fight alone. The White House began pressing the EU to join what it called an economic alliance for freedom. Trump's advisors believed that if Europe erected its own 500% barrier, China could lose over $800 billion in annual exports, dragging its growth below 3%, a level they hoped would trigger internal instability. Still, the strategy carried a double-edged risk. Europe remains deeply dependent on low-cost Chinese goods and intermediate components, from energy batteries and circuit boards to rare earth materials imported indirectly through Asia. An unnamed EU official told the Financial Times, if the U.S. launches a 500% tariff war, It could pull the entire world into recession. Washington, however, seemed willing to accept that risk. For American policymakers, China's economic strength now posed a strategic threat greater than the cost of any trade war. If tariffs are only the visible surface, the real conflict is unfolding deep underground. Behind every policy paper and congressional resolution lies Washington's most persistent fear that China holds the lifeblood of the 21st century rare earth elements. So what exactly are these substances that make superpowers so uneasy? Contrary to their name, rare earths are not actually rare. What makes them rare is not scarcity, but refinement, a complex, energy-intensive process involving toxic chemicals and radioactive waste. Only nations with advanced metallurgical capability and the willingness to bear environmental costs can produce them at industrial scale. From the smartphone in your hand to an F-35 fighter jet or a factory robot, every modern technology carries traces of these 17 elements. Analysts call them the vitamins of modern industry. Remove just one, and the entire production chain can collapse. In the latter half of the 20th century, Mountain Pass in California was the beating heart of the global rare earth industry. Europium fueled early color televisions. Neodymium and samarium powered laser sensors and guided weapons. But this dominance eroded rapidly in the late 1990s. Stricter environmental rules and a thorium leakage accident in the Mojave Desert halted refining, drove compliance costs through the roof, and left the U.S. domestic chain in disarray. The void America left behind was quietly filled by China. Beijing invested simultaneously in materials science, metallurgy, and processing infrastructure, leveraging low costs to scale up Bayan Obo in Inner Mongolia, now the largest rare earth mine on Earth. At the same time, China absorbed Western technology through strategic acquisitions. One emblematic case was Magna-Quench, a General Motors subsidiary pioneering NdFeB magnets. When it was sold in the late 1990s, its production line was soon transferred to China, giving Beijing control over the magnetic heart of modern motors. By the mid-2000s, Beijing consolidated hundreds of small producers into the Big Six and launched the 1+5 campaign to systematically command every stage: mining, separation, refining, export, and R&D applications. The result: China no longer exported raw ore. It exported finished components at higher value, controlling prices, standards, and delivery schedules across the globe. The world first witnessed China's leverage in 2010. During a territorial dispute with Japan, Beijing quietly suspended rare earth exports to Tokyo. Japan's industrial chain faltered almost overnight. From that moment, the world understood rare earths could be wielded as instruments of economic coercion. To understand why Washington loses sleep over rare earths, one only needs to look at the anatomy of its defense platforms. According to public estimates, every F-35 fighter jet contains roughly 417 kilograms of rare earth materials, crucial for magnetic strength, heat resistance, and radar durability. These components cannot simply be replaced with cheaper alternatives without compromising combat performance. A Virginia-class nuclear submarine requires about 9,200 pounds or 4.2 metric tons of rare earths for its electric propulsion system, sonar, and guidance modules. Without rare earths, radars cannot scan engines, cannot spin, and precision weapons cannot fly in the right direction. In reality, nearly 90% of the rare earth oxides used in U.S. defense applications are refined in China, even if the raw ore comes from countries like Australia or Vietnam. The global supply chain functions like a closed circuit, and the refining link always leads back to Beijing. For years, the U.S. Department of Defense has funded programs to mitigate this risk through initiatives like the Defense Production Act, DPA, and Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment, IBAs. Yet even Pentagon officials admit that building a domestic refining ecosystem is a long-term process that remains at an early stage in both scale and capability. The result is unavoidable. Every alternative strategy still has to pass through China's gate, no matter how hard America tries to go around it. That makes rare earths the single greatest strategic vulnerability in the U.S. national security chain. Throughout history, power has always been tied to resources. The 20th century was defined by oil, the black liquid that fueled America's rise, ignited wars in the Middle East, and triggered energy shocks that rippled across the globe. But the 21st century is being written in a different language, the language of rare earths. Unlike oil, rare earths don't burn, don't shine, and remain invisible to most eyes. Yet they lie at the heart of every modern technology. If oil once powered the mechanical age, rare earths are the fuel of the digital age. And in this new game, China has done what the West once did with oil a century ago, monopolize the lifeblood of the future. Western analysts call it the geopolitics of rare atoms. While Washington believed it could contain Beijing by restricting semiconductor access, China chose to strike back at a deeper level by controlling the materials that make semiconductors possible. When the U.S. banned advanced chips to China, Beijing responded in kind, demanding that global firms from ASML and TSMC to Intel obtain special licenses if they wanted to use Chinese rare earths in chips of 14 nanometers or below. The ripple effect spread everywhere. Markets for strategic metals turned volatile. The yuan strengthened. Defense contractors across the West were forced to recalculate costs. Investors began to view rare earths as technological gold assets that were both strategic and easily manipulated by politics. Meanwhile, Beijing reaped a double dividend, maintaining supply control while forcing its rivals to pay more for every gram of material. The question is no longer who produces more, but who can endure scarcity longer. And in that race, China holds a decisive advantage, a closed ecosystem combining resources, technology, labor, and state-backed policy. The battle between the United States and China at its core is not just a struggle over trade or technology. It is a contest to redefine the world's economic order, one model built on open markets, the other on resource control. Both sides understand the same truth. Whoever controls the supply chains writes the rules for the world.